Today, women make up more than half of the American electorate and are more engaged than ever in our politics. Yet we remain marginalized in government and elective office.
It's important for women to have a voice in this democracy because we see women being disproportionately affected across our society in so many areas.
The reality is the news industry is already gendered. The 19th is working to level the playing field.
Our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk, the recognition of the omission of certain women from the franchise, from access to the ballot.
We are firm believers that all issues are women's issues. Our readers are people who care about those issues, who care deeply about the intersection of gender, politics, and policy, and want a more nuanced approach to that politics and policy journalism.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Live with the 19th.
With live events and interviews, the 19th is fostering civil conversations and community building that brings our readers into direct contact with the people who represent them.
There's never been a Black woman governor in American history.
I think that our newsroom being as diverse as it is, it means that we're looking and telling stories of women that maybe had not been previously represented in media before.
Our goal is to launch the first newsroom that is truly reflective of the nation's women.
There's more women running now than ever have been before, and people want to be informed.
Because what we know is that women are eager to have conversations about politics and often do not feel like they have a safe space to do that. We want to create that community for women, and we want to create that community for women everywhere.
Newsrooms need to be more inclusive. They need to better reflect their communities. The 19th has the opportunity to do that from the ground floor, and we're not wasting that opportunity.
There's never been a better moment than right now.
The 19th is the newsroom that we've been waiting for.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the final day of the 19th Represents, our week of virtual events aimed at elevating women's voices in politics, policy, and our democracy. I'm Amanda Zamora, the co-founder and publisher of The 19th, a brand new nonprofit newsroom that launched last week at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. If you haven't already, I hope you'll check us out at 19thnews.org. It's been an extraordinary week, hearing from people like philanthropist Melinda Gates, voting rights activist Stacey Abrams, Senator Tammy Duckworth, and getting to experience the arts through the Go-Go's, the New York Philharmonic, actors Meryl Streep and Zoe Saldana. And there's even more to come today. We founded the 19th to shine a light on the unfinished business of the 19th Amendment, which gave some, but not all women, the right to vote a century ago. Today, we're going to delve into those difficult conversations around race, gender, and privilege, and do it with an absolutely stunning lineup. We'll start today with a conversation between the 19th's editor-at-large Erin Haynes and U.S. Senator and Democratic Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris. We'll hear some extraordinary poetry by women poets, read by Dr. Elizabeth Alexander, a poet, scholar, and president of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. We'll tune into a critically important conversation on race, gender, and allyship with authors Robin DiAngelo and Brittany Cooper in conversation with Sunny Hostin. Finally, we'll wrap up the week by learning more about the 19th's mission to reach and reflect underserved women with 19th co-founder and CEO Emily Ramshaw in conversation with Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex. But before we begin today's programming, I want to sincerely thank the sponsors and philanthropic partners who made this week possible. That's Goldman Sachs, Intuit, the Impact Seat, the Lenfest Institute, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wincote Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Stardust Fund, PEN America, the Heinz Endowments, CVS Health, the Panacea Collective, Aero PR, and Lingua Franca. I also want to remind you that the 19th is a member-supported newsroom, and we can't put on this kind of free programming without your support. We hope you'll join us at 19thnews.org. Every $19 helps. And if you missed any of this week's programming or just want to watch again, visit 19thnews.org/events. With that, I am thrilled to introduce my colleague Erin Haynes for today's conversation with Senator Harris.
Hello, I'm Erin Haynes, editor-at-large for The 19th, and welcome to Day 5 of The 19th Represents. Today, we're in conversation with somebody who you may have seen in the headlines a bit this week. Senator Kamala Harris of California was announced Tuesday as the 2020 Democratic vice presidential nominee, a historic choice that ended months of speculation over which of the qualified, capable, and talented women Joe Biden would select as his running mate. Senator Harris, we're so excited that you could join us for your first extended conversation since joining the ticket. Thanks so much for being here.
I am so happy to be with you, Erin, and on purpose, my first interview as a teammate and a running mate with Joe Biden is with the 19th. So thank you. It's good to be with you.
Well, thank you so much for stopping by. Listen, I know so many of the people out here watching today are wanting to hear directly from you about how we got to this moment. So let's talk about this sweepstakes process, which must have been even more nerve-wracking and high stakes for you than it was for all of us who were watching from the outside. I want to start by asking you how your name came up for this role. I mean, is this something that you told Joe Biden that you were interested in, or did he approach you?
Well, you know, first of all, let me say I've been very honored through the process to be in the conversation among, to your point, so many incredibly talented women. And I have worked with almost all of them. We should be very proud that among the leaders of our nation, there are so many accomplished, brilliant, talented women. And to even be mentioned in that group was an honor. And of course, to be asked by Joe Biden to be his running mate is an incredible honor. And I will tell you, I'm so excited about Joe's platform and him as a person. And we're going to get this done. We're going to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned those talented women, many of whom you worked with, some of whom you ran against last year. What was it like to be in competition with so many of the women that you knew, worked with, and respected? And did you talk to any of them during this process? And did that add to the pressure and anxiety of this process at all for you?
Well, you know, I don't think, I'll speak for myself, but I think I'm speaking for all of us. I don't think any of us thought of ourselves as being in competition with each other. And many of us have worked together, sometimes for years. And it really was about, and I know this to be true, a pride that we all had, knowing that when we were running, for example, we weren't the only woman on that stage, that we were representing a picture about what the leadership of this country is and should be going forward, and in a way that is also inspiring of all the women who will come after us, who know that their righteous place on that stage. So I don't think we ever really thought of it as a competition, as much as really a collective sense of pride that we were all on that stage together, showing the diversity among who we are as women, and really, I think, in many ways challenging folks who may not have ever imagined that to see what that looks like. And it was a real point of pride and joy for me to be with those women on that stage.
Well, I know, we've talked before about, your belief that there should have been a woman on the ticket, period, whether it was going to be in the number 1 or number 2 spot. Certainly, with Joe Biden declaring this spring that should he become the nominee, he was going to put a woman on the ticket, was very exciting for the majority of the electorate, women in this country. And, as that conversation continued, there was some talk about whether, who that woman should be. Should that be a woman of color, and specifically a Black woman? I want to ask you, I mean, did you feel that Joe Biden needed to choose a Black woman or a woman of color as his running mate? And is that something that you talked to him about at any point in this process?
Well, let's sit back and think about this. Joe Biden had the audacity to choose a Black woman to be his running mate. How incredible is that? And what a statement about Joe Biden, that he decided that he was going to do that thing that was about breaking one of the most substantial barriers that has existed in our country, and that he made that decision with whatever risk that brings. I think as much as anything, it's a statement about the character of the man that we're going to elect as the next president of the United States.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about that as a risk. I mean, there are some people who have asked me, if they thought that Joe Biden was making the safe choice by doing that. I certainly don't agree with the premise of that question, but I wonder what you think about the risk that is. that is the choice that he made, that he did choose you, and he is making a historic choice. There's never been a Black woman nominated for vice president as on a major party ticket before.
Right, and so that it's a statement, I think, about the vision that Joe Biden has about who we are as a nation and the future of our nation. And that's one of the things, frankly, about who he is that gives me such excitement about the Biden-Harris ticket. Because the Biden-Harris ticket is about an agenda that is about representing who America really is, and knowing that among us there may be those who seemingly have nothing in common but have everything in common. Joe Biden knows that. And it is also about saying that this is going to be an administration, the Biden-Harris administration, that is focused on the future of our country, motivated by what can be, unburdened by what has been.
Yeah, you talked about that even during your presidential campaign, just the idea of what this does for the American imagination, to see somebody that comes in a package like yours standing for this office. Aaron,
let me also say this. I am not unique. There are a lot of people like me. There are a lot of folks where I come from. I come from people. And that is part of the point. Maybe it is for some to stimulate their imagination, but for others, what we know is that this is actually who we are, and what we are. And it is a statement that is an affirmation about who we truly are. And this in the face of the current president of the United States, who has spent full time trying to sow hate and division in our country. And again, when we're looking at this election, which is coming up in 80-something days, there is a clear contrast between the current occupant of the White House and that administration and the Biden-Harris ticket. And a lot of it has to do with not only about unity, but it has to do about really knowing who the people of our country are, and it being focused on them, and it being about them, and it being about working families, it being about childcare, being about making sure people have jobs, that they have health care. These are the things that really are what this ticket is about, focused on who the American people really are and what they really want.
Yeah. I want you to tell us, if you can, about your final interview with Joe Biden. When did it happen? Where was it? How long did it last? I mean, how would you describe it? I would think it would probably have been the hardest and most important job interview of your life.
It was a really wonderful conversation. Joe and I, we share many experiences, believe it or not, and values. We both care deeply about family, deeply. Joe has he has known suffering, and it is, well known about the people he loved the most, who he has lost. He and I have a shared experience in that way. We have talked about the importance of supporting the dignity of work and working people, including organized labor and collective bargaining. He and I, both having gone through the healthcare system with people we love, have talked about the need for making sure that nobody is denied health coverage. And that's such a big signature part of his plan, as opposed to the current occupant of the White House, who's got his lawyers in court right now trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act, which President Obama and Vice President brought health care to tens of millions of people. And under Trump, it might be taken away. These are the things that he and I talked about. And it really is about being grounded in values that are a combination of hope and vision, and faith and commitment and hard work. And it was an incredible conversation that we have continued to have. I'm here in Delaware right now. Doug, my husband, and Jill and Joe, we have been spending time together. We've been talking about our families, about our kids, and about the children of our country. And it's really exciting, Aaron. It really is truly exciting.
Yeah. I mean, can you say when that final interview was with him?
It was before it was announced.
Yes, that is certainly an answer. Well, I mean, we've talked about the dual pandemics of coronavirus and systemic racism that have been roiling us for several months now. I mean, it felt like the criteria changed so much for those of us on the outside looking in, kind of in terms of what Joe Biden might need as a campaigning and a governing partner should he win in November. I wonder if that changed what you thought that the case was for what you potentially brought to this ticket in this administration.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, I mean, the Biden-Harris agenda is a shared agenda. For example, Joe had a whole plan that was, you know, his Build Back Better plan about the economy, but it includes understanding the connection between the creation of jobs and also bringing dignity and support to working families, right? And so, for example, one of the parts of the Build Back Better plan is to bring healthcare and home healthcare to seniors and to people who need it. And then, but also make sure that caregivers are being paid a livable and a righteous wage and getting all the benefits in terms of workers' benefits. So in that plan, he adopted the Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights, which is something I'd been working on for a couple of years. And when we talk about domestic workers, be clear, we are talking about predominantly women of color who are spending hours upon hours, night and day, taking care of other people's children, other people's parents and grandparents. And the Biden-Harris plan is about saying they too deserve dignity and support for the work that they do. It ranges to what we have as a shared commitment around addressing the climate crisis. And so there's a whole plan that is about creating 1 million jobs in terms of investing in an infrastructure for renewable energy, but also with a focus on making sure communities of color and our indigenous brothers and sisters are part of the plan, knowing that in America today, in communities that have some of the worst health quality or air quality, 70% of the people living there are people of color. So these are the components of the plan, the overall plan for Building Back Better. And it really is a shared commitment that is about paying attention to racial disparities, paying attention to gender disparities, and also paying attention to what we need to do to grow back our country in a way that we can actually, again, aspire to the ideals that we have yet to meet, but can move closer toward.
You mentioned your husband, Doug, and yes. At the end of your speech on Wednesday, you were joined by Doug, yes. whom both you and Joe Biden mentioned during the event. Now, I remember seeing Doug quite a bit on the campaign trail.
Yes.
But I suspect we may hear from Doug more in the coming days as he introduces himself to the country and prepares for the prospect of taking on a historic role himself, that of second man.
Isn't that something?
What can you say? Is he up for the job? I mean, can we expect to see him playing a large role in this general election campaign?
I have to tell you, I married a man who is so supportive and encouraging of women, period, but so supportive. You know, Doug is comfortable being behind the scenes or being next to me or being in front of me. He's comfortable. He loves his family. He loves my cooking. And he loves our country. And, you know, he and Jill have an incredible relationship. You know, they bonded actually when we were all running. And I do believe that their relationship is a very special one that America is also going to witness. Yeah.
Well, you know, also in your remarks on Wednesday, you gave a nod to the heroic and ambitious women that came before you. Yeah. I remember when you announced your candidacy for president, you did so in the pioneering spirit of Shirley Chisholm.
Yeah.
You talked about your mother, Shamala.
Yeah.
As we prepare to mark the centennial of women's suffrage, obviously our newsroom is named for the 19th Amendment, but with an asterisk for the women who were omitted from full access to the franchise, you know, until
1965, right?
Yes. Exactly. Yes. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts on how this moment intersects with your own historic candidacy.
Yeah. I'm glad you asked that. You know, when I think about obviously the centennial and the importance of acknowledging the accomplishment, but also how recent it is and how much we still have to do to achieve equity when you look at issues like pay equity, something that Joe Biden talks about and we're going to deal with in our administration. There's a lot to celebrate in terms of the accomplishment, but also it should motivate us to also be clear-eyed about what yet has to be done in the unfinished business. But the other way I think about it is as a proud HBCU graduate, and in particular from Howard University, because I was recently looking at some of the photographs and listening to some of the stories as a reminder of the fact that there were Howard and other HBCU women, but Howard women, as Howard is in DC, who were demanding, along with those other suffragettes, the right for women's enfranchisement and the right to vote. And there are beautiful photographs of Howard women meeting with President Woodrow Wilson to demand that women have access to the polls. And so when I think about this centennial, I do also think about the fact that let's be reminded about the ability of women also at every stage to build coalition and to fight together. But let's also acknowledge the disparities that still exist based on race. And let's all work on that together as those suffragettes did 100 years ago.
My first story for the 19th was actually about you and your campaign last year and issues of race and gender and frankly how they play out in our politics. You obviously ran as the lone Black woman in a very crowded Democratic presidential primary. I'm wondering, just to hear from you about how the role of race and gender, how you saw that play out in your campaign, and how, that experience, your qualifications and your lived experience, how you bring those lessons to the fight ahead in this general election and how you may govern going forward.
Yeah. I mean, your question and your point brings me back to the point about the courage and the commitment that Joe Biden has had to ask me to be his running mate. Because to your point, I'm the only Black woman in the United States Senate, the only one, and only the second in the history of the United States Senate. And so when we look again at how far we have to go, we have a lot of work to do. And by Joe asking me to be his running mate, he has pushed forward something that might have otherwise taken decades if you just track the progress that we've had so far. And what it means is it is the significance of it is an understanding, by Joe and our what will be, God willing, our administration about the need to be conscious about the disparities that exist, be conscious about the systemic racism that exists, be conscious about the active and affirmative acts that must take place to actually get closer to an equitable and fair society. And I think that that's something that folks really should see in the significance of, again, this ticket, which is that this is a statement about the fact that we're not going to just wait for somebody to give us permission. We're not going to just wait for some broad consensus where everyone feels like, oh yeah, that's normal, I'm comfortable with it. Sometimes we have to get out of our comfort zone to do what is right, to move forward. The issues in particular that you address in the 19th Amendment that are about women and women of color, so that we can get where we need to go.
Yeah. If you become the first female vice president in the history of this country, what specifically can we expect you to fight for the women of this country?
Everything. I mean, listen, I said this back on that cold day in January in 2017 at the Women's March, which is every issue is a woman's issue and women's issues should be everyone's issues. And so when I think about women's issues, I think about, and in fact, I'll tell you, Aaron, so, I've been the first woman to be elected to most of the positions I've had. And so these journalists would come up to me with this very creative question. They put a microphone in front of my face and they'd say, so tell us, what's it like to be the first woman, fill in the blank? And I'd look at them and I'd say, I'm so glad you asked that question. Because certainly, I don't know what to tell you because, I mean, I've always been a woman.
Right.
But I'm sure a man could do the job just as well, right? Or people would say, well, talk to us about women's issues. And I'd say, I am so glad you want to talk about the economy.
Right.
Or sometimes I'd say, I'm so glad you want to talk about healthcare. Or I'm so glad you want to talk about national security. I'm so glad you want to talk about the climate crisis. I'm so glad you want to talk about immigration, right? And so I will say this, that in a Biden-Harris administration, women are going to be a priority, understanding that women have many priorities, and all of them must be acknowledged. And but it will certainly start with it being very clear-eyed about the disproportionate weight that women carry on certain issues. We could talk about equity, but let's also talk about the weight that women carry of responsibility. Women are primary caregivers to children and their parents and seniors. So that's why we need to have paid family leave. That is a priority of the Biden-Harris administration and will be. It is about what we need to do to have affordable childcare. That is a priority. Going back to what I said about what we need to do to have assistance for seniors who want to live in their homes and give them the support and the caregiving they need in their homes. These are the kinds of priorities that have been part of the first policy initiatives that have been offered in this campaign. And those will continue, understanding, again, women carry a disproportionate burden for a lot of those responsibilities. And so we need to recognize that and fix the problem.
Yeah, well, we at the 19th could not agree more that all issues are women's issues. And
Yes.
so thank you for underscoring and reminding people about that. I also wonder, now that you've been tapped for this role, I wonder if that changes your own ambitions for your political future. What does this mean for other women across the country who may be thinking about their political ambitions and what is possible?
Oh, I mean, listen, I've told you before, my mother raised me with many sayings, and one of them is she said, Kamala, you may be the first to do many things. Make sure you're not the last. And I take that as my duty. I feel a great sense of personal responsibility to make sure that when we walk through those doors, that we widen those doors and then help, each one pull one, not just widen the door and then keep walking, but each one pull one, so that we can, again, make it the case that no longer are we just making these firsts and celebrating these firsts. These are celebrations worth having. But, in 2020, I think we all would agree that we would like that we are no longer having the first woman in any position, but many women in those positions.
Yes. Well, to your point about not being the last Black woman to represent the state of California out of the U.S. Senate, should you become the next Vice President of the United States, your Senate seat will be open. Are there Black women who you would like to see possibly succeeding you in that seat should you elevate to the number 2 position in the country?
Listen, I think that, again, there are 100 United States senators. This should not just be about California. This is a national issue. If I am, we should all sit back and say, how is it that when you look at the role of Black women in the history of building our country, much less in the history of even most recent politics, much less, historically, it is inexcusable that we would not have full representation in the United States Congress. And so this should not just be about any one state. We should be saying this across the nation, because there are so many talented Black women and women of color, period, who are on that path, and they should be encouraged. I want to say that we encourage and always support women who are running for office, and support them, knowing that even if they are the first, that they are the one that is necessary for us to continue to break these barriers. I have not achieved anything that I have without the support of many who believed in the possibility of someone who has never been there before being there. And that's what we have to do across the nation.
I want to also talk about November, this election. We're obviously seeing concerns over voter suppression, voter depression, possibly, and the need for voter turnout, the kind of turnout that you all are going to need to win in November, even in the midst of a pandemic. Certainly, I'm seeing a lot of Black women in particular who are galvanized by the announcement of your joining this ticket. What do you think Black women in particular are going to do in November in terms of turning out in the midst of this pandemic? What do you think that your addition to this ticket does to excite and energize the base of the Democratic Party?
Well, I think listen, there is that piece of it that is a point of pride, but listen, Black women pay attention to the issues. Black women are motivated to vote for the people who represent their priorities and their needs. And so when you look at everything that relates to what we have discussed in terms of childcare, when you look at what we are talking about in terms of jobs, when you talk about healthcare, when you look at what we need to do to address racial and not only disparities, right, in terms of the healthcare system, in terms of the economy, in terms of the education system, but what we need to do to also speak about systemic racism. When you have one ticket that can say the phrase Black Lives Matter, and another who has been full-time sowing hate and division in our country, those are the things that are going to motivate Black women to vote. There will be a point of pride. I don't want to have any false modesty about a Black woman being on the ticket, but it takes more than just that to motivate Black women to vote. People have to speak to their issues, and the Biden-Harris ticket does that.
Yeah, you certainly have been somebody that's been out in the protests during the Black Lives Matter movement that we've seen return this summer with the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Ahmaud Arbery. And yet we see, a climate that is racialized, and a president that has already kind of returned to a racial playbook headed into November. We've said during this past year that racism is on the ballot for a lot of Americans, and Joe Biden has said that this is a battle for the soul of America. What does that mean to you, and how concerned are you about this national reckoning and how it may play out in our election for voters? Yeah,
I mean, like you said, Joe says and has been saying, this is a battle for the soul of our country. And when we look at someone like the current occupant of the White House, again, he has not been lifting folks up. Joe and what we are about is about lifting people up, understanding that the strength of a leader is based on not who you beat down, but who you lift up. And these are the things that are at stake right now. And when we talk about the election in November, this is probably one of the most important elections of our lifetime. Literally, this is probably one of the most important elections of our lifetime. This is about everything, every issue that we discussed, and whether we're going to have a president of the United States who actually works to lift folks up and give you a sense of pride in your country, or somebody who is just full-time, just beating people down. And I fear that if we don't correct course, the damage will be irreversible. Everything is on the line in this election, so many things. And so here's what I'll say about voting, Aaron. There are states and there are state legislatures who, especially after the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, have put in place laws that have been designed to suppress the vote, and in particular the Black vote, students from voting, Indigenous people from voting. And those obstacles, some of them we're going to fight against and get rid of before the election. Some of them are still going to be in place. So here's the thing. Everybody has to remember this and ask this question of yourself. Why don't they want us to vote? Why don't they want us to vote? Why are they creating obstacles to us voting? Well, the answer is because when we vote, things change. When we vote, things get better. When we vote, we address the disparities we've been talking about. We address the need of all people to be treated with dignity and respect. These are the things that are on the line in this election. And so we know how to jump over or get around the obstacles that for many of us have been in place since the day we were born. And that's going to be the job ahead of us in the next 80-something days, to jump over those obstacles and to make sure our voices are heard and counted in this election.
Well, I can't think of a better note to end on at the 19th than a conversation about the importance of voting. Thank you so much, Senator Harris, for this conversation. You covered a lot of ground today. I appreciate you taking a detour from the campaign trail to chat with us about this historic moment for you. Thank you so much, and good luck out there.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Erin. All right. Thank you, 19th.
At Intuit, we believe you cannot have prosperity without equality. Women and people of color should not be paid less than men for the same work. 3 years ago, we made a commitment to reach and maintain pay equity for our employees. But pay equity is an ongoing process, and all companies must join this fight. Like the 19th Amendment, we are not done.
The Goldman Sachs 10,000 Women program has been a game changer for my business.
Thank you, Erin and Senator Harris, for a terrific start to today's programming. Now, I'm honored to introduce this performance by poet, scholar, and president of the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, Dr. Elizabeth Alexander. Elizabeth will be reading excerpts from women activist poets, and you are in for a treat.
Good afternoon. I'm honored to join this powerful celebration of American women and of all that we have achieved since the 19th Amendment was adopted 100 summers ago. In that time, we've made many leaps forward, but we have many, many more milestones to reach in the journey to equal rights and representation, from adoption of the Equal Rights Amendment to overcoming voter suppression in Black communities. Today, I celebrate the centennial of the 19th Amendment in the spirit of the social justice and civil rights activists who continue to guide us toward an America transformed by unshakable equality and fairness for all. We've chosen the words of a few far-sighted poets who write, speak, and make art in that beautiful activist tradition, ushering forth in the spirit of June Jordan's words in Poem for South African Women. We are the ones we have been waiting for. These poets are women who have raised families, communities, consciousness over the last 100 years. Women who teach and march, write and remember, stand and sing, embrace us and urge us on, and steady us even as they clearly see and articulate the arduous road that we face ahead. Through their words, these poets offer up a vision of an America reimagined history by history, poem by poem. Through their words, these poets give us a vision of an America reimagined, serving as guides into the next 100 summers of civil rights to affirm and victories to achieve. Together, these poets lead us forward into the America we seek. Julia de Burgos, who gives us the name in this poem that we're going to read of our session, Forward, was an extraordinary poet, journalist, and social justice activist who hoped to help Puerto Rico achieve independence. She was born 6 years before the adoption of the 19th Amendment. And this is her poem, Yo misma fui mi ruta, translated into English by Jack Agueros. I wanted to be like men wanted me to be, an attempt at life, a game of hide and seek with my being. But I was made of nows, and my feet level upon the promissory earth would not accept walking backwards, and went forward, mocking the ashes to reach the kiss of the new paths. At each advancing step on my route forward, my back was ripped by the desperate flapping wings of the old guard. But the branch was unpinned forever, and at each new whiplash, my look separated more and more and more from the distant, familiar horizons. And my face took the expression that came from within, that defined expression, that hinted at a feeling of intimate liberation, a feeling that surged from the balance between my life and the truth of the kiss of the new paths. Already my course now set in the present, I felt myself a blossom of all the soils of the earth, of the soils without history, of the soils without a future, of the soil, always soil without edges, of all the men and all the epics, and I was all in me, as was life in me. I wanted to be like men wanted me to be, an attempt at life, a game of hide and seek with my being. But I was made of nows. When the heralds announced me at the regal parade of the old guard, the desire to follow men warped in me, and the homage was left waiting for me. Julia de Burgos. The poet Audre Lorde, the theorist Audre Lorde, the essayist Audre Lorde, the teacher Audre Lorde, the mother Audre Lorde, the lesbian Audre Lorde, the Audre Lorde who talks about being made up of all these journey woman pieces of myself, insisted on indivisibility in our identity. She didn't use the word intersectionality, she used the word indivisibility. And this is her poem, Who Said It Was Simple. There are so many roots to the tree of anger that sometimes the branches shatter before they bear. Sitting in Nedics, the women rally before they march, discussing the problematic girls they hire to make them free. An almost white counterman passes a waiting brother to serve them first, and the ladies neither notice nor reject the slighter pleasures of their slavery. But I, who am bound by my mirror as well as my bed, see causes in color as well as sex, and sit here wondering which me will survive all these liberations. I was honored to write a poem this year that was co-commissioned by the Academy of American Poets as part of the New York Philharmonic's Project 19, which is another initiative that marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment. And I thought to history and thought about what it meant that the 19th Amendment gave the vote to women, but that there was not an understanding in that moment that Black women had a different historical and lived reality. And I was very interested in women in the 19th century when Black men were given the vote, who understood that it was not a singular vote, but rather it was a vote that belonged to the family. And that idea of our individual votes as always being representative of more than just the self is something that animates my thinking and gives me a lot of direction. So this is a poem in the voice of an imagined person named Dora, and it's called The Family Vote. Dora looks back from the dead. Before my people were required to answer impossible questions in order to vote, how many bubbles in a bar of soap? How many jelly beans fill up a jar? Can you prove that your grandfather voted? There was a time when Black men could vote and Black women could not. 1870, 5 years free, and that vote belonged to the family. Our families had been sold apart and scattered, defiled, burnt, unraveled. We formed anew. The vote was not personal property. The vote did not belong to one alone. There was no mine, the family vote. I'd gather the gun in the folds of my skirt and walk with my husband to the polling place. Sentry the perimeter so he could cast the vote. We'd learned to read in secret, make soup from a stone, infiltrate a way out of no way, cut through glass and burn through fog. Eventually, we got the precious vote. That too was not personal property. That too belonged to the family. I look back across vast years from this eternal and testify and sign my name, Dora, an emancipated slave. And of course, it took us into the 1960s for the Voting Rights Act to be passed, and it takes us to this very day to continue the fight to ensure that people are not disenfranchised in this country, as many still are. And then finally, great Grace Paley, exemplar of so much that the 19th stands for, much missed, but here in her fierce and eternal words that speak so directly and that I think also here help us remember that the arts and poetry in this case have everything to do with struggle and liberation. Without the word, there is no freedom. There is no vision of freedom without the words to articulate it. And I think our poets give us those words in their most distilled and actionable forms. So this is Grace Paley, Responsibility. It is the responsibility of society to let the poet be a poet. It is the responsibility of the poet to be a woman. It is the responsibility of the poet to stand on street corners, giving out poems and beautifully written leaflets. Also leaflets they can hardly bear to look at because of the screaming rhetoric. It is the responsibility of the poet to be lazy, to hang out and prophesy. It is the responsibility of the poet not to pay war taxes. It is the responsibility of the poet to go in and out of ivory towers and two-room apartments on Avenue C and buckwheat fields and army camps. It is the responsibility of the male poet to be a woman. It is the responsibility of the female poet to be a woman. It is the poet's responsibility to speak truth to power, as the Quakers say. It is the poet's responsibility to learn the truth from the powerless. It is the responsibility of the poet to say many times, there is no freedom without justice, and this means economic justice and love justice. It is the responsibility of the poet to sing this all in the original and traditional tunes of singing and telling poems. It is the responsibility of the poet to listen to gossip and pass it on in the ways storytellers decant the story of life. There is no freedom without fear and bravery. There is no freedom unless earth and air and water continue and children also continue. It is the responsibility of the poet to be a woman, to keep an eye on this world and cry out like Cassandra, but be listened to this time. And Audre Lorde can close us out. I am, are you ready?
Next up, we hope you'll stick around for a critically important and timely conversation on race and allyship in America with two brilliant authors, Dr. Robin DiAngelo, the author of White Fragility, and Dr. Brittney Cooper, the author of Eloquent Rage. And with us to moderate this conversation is the incomparable Sunny Hostin, co-host of The View.
Now, in celebrating the 19th Amendment, we must also recognize the women the 19th Amendment left behind, right? Black women. Black women didn't unilaterally gain the right to vote until the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so because the 19th Amendment failed them, Black women were really forced to build a voting rights movement. And in building that movement, Black women became the heart, the soul of the Democratic Party, among the party's most reliable and loyal voters and organizers, most importantly, I think. That allegiance didn't, for decades, translate into the political rise of Black women. However, there seems to be a change afoot. Senator Kamala Harris is now the vice presidential nominee for the Democratic Party. Black women across the country, women of color, were just they felt so empowered. I myself had the ugly cry for the past 2 days. But Black women still are not equal participants in our democracy. So I'd like to explore with you how white women can become allies in that regard. And I ask you, Dr. Cooper, Brittney Cooper, in discussing allyship, many Black women have felt that the relationship is one-sided, right? So as an example of that, we think about the election of Donald Trump. 53% of white women voted for Donald Trump, even though there was a white woman on the ticket. 94% of Black women voted for Hillary Clinton, the highest voting bloc in the nation. There was a Black feminist author, Tamara Harris, who wrote in 2016, "The triumph of President-elect Donald Trump represents the failure of many things. One of them is white feminism." Your response?
Absolutely. There is a long-standing historical battle between white women and Black women. And part of white women's challenge is that white women have had close proximity to white men, their rule, their power. And so white women have felt a natural entitlement, and they have balked at having proximity to white male power and being excluded from it. Black women are different because we have been excluded on the basis of both our race and our gender. And so we have a different understanding of what a freedom project is and about how to fight. So we both have to fight. We've had to fight historically white men to get them to relinquish some power. And then we've had to fight white women to understand that just because they are white, it doesn't mean that they get to be first in every respect. And that's going to be a critically important point in this moment when it looks like Kamala Harris is not only going to be the first woman to be vice president, but she might be the heir apparent to the Biden presidency given Joe Biden's age. And so white women are really going to have to do this work about, can they let Black women be first, especially since a Black man made it into the presidency first before a white woman did, which was also a huge battle in 2008. When we think about this long history of feminism, and we think about this in the context of the 19th Amendment and voting rights, one of the things that white women did was to say, they used racist tropes to say that Black people were not fit for the vote when they found out that Black men were going to be conferred voting rights before white women were. They were deeply resentful of that. And many of our white feminist faves, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and many others were appalled at the idea that anybody Black would be seen as able or more fit to exercise this right of American citizenship before them. And while some white women during that period handled it pretty well, somebody like Lucy Stone, who said, "I don't feel good about this, but I'm not going to keep African Americans from getting the right to vote," In this moment, white women have to decide what side of history are they going to be on. Are they going to put their own interest ahead of everyone else? Or are they going to recognize that Black women have a long history of equanimity and that we can be trusted to govern and to create the widest tent possible?
Now, let me ask you, Robin DiAngelo, fast forward to 2020. Even though a majority of white women did vote for Trump, many white women now are urging resistance to his presidency, calling for solidarity now along racial lines. How do Black women trust white women to be allies now in this moment?
I actually think it's rational not to trust white women to be allies until we demonstrate that we are and can be allies. That is a rational, protective approach because over and over and over we have let you down. I'm thinking about the question that you had just asked, Brittany. And it illustrates how tightly entwined patriarchy and white supremacy are, but how powerful white supremacy is to trump so many other things. And we have always been able to manipulate the white populace by raising the specter of anti-Blackness, right? And I think one of the reasons that affirmative action has served white women the most is that when white men had, you have to let some folks in here. Who did they let in? White women. Why? Because that also served their interests. So as long as we continue to align our interests with patriarchy and uphold white supremacy, we are not going to be trustworthy. So we really have to show some kind of continuity and consistency. It's okay to lightly step in and see what we're going to do. I'm not saying out of hand. But I don't think it would be fair for us to expect the benefit of the doubt when we haven't showed up consistently up until now.
Well, let me follow up then. What do you think are the roadblocks to that alliance? What are the main roadblocks, and how do we get past those? How do we surpass that? Because we are less than 100 days from this election, and that alliance, that allegiance is more important than ever.
Yeah, right now, because it is clearly in white women's interests not to have Trump, then we are likely going to support the Biden-Harris ticket. But, in the long term, will we continue to support Kamala Harris, right? When things get hard or when the backlash comes, right? So I want to point out that now we are awake when we see the consequence of a Trump presidency, but I'm not sure that is that there was more motivation than that. That there's been more motivation than that. Right now, it definitely serves our interest.
Let me ask you, Brittany, are the issues that galvanize white female voters different from those that galvanize Black female voters?
They are. And one of the reasons that they typically have been is because white women understand their participation in American democracy as securing the future of white privilege for their sons and their husbands and their brothers and the men in their lives. And so one of the things that 2016 taught me, so for a long time, white feminists in the 70s would say, well, Black women, they don't even think about things in terms of women. They just primarily care about race and they just vote their racial interests. And they never listen to us when we say gender matters. And what we came to learn in 2016 was that white women also vote their racial interests, because given the things we knew about Donald Trump in 2016 when he was talking about being a pussy grabber, just as one example, or sexualizing his daughter, all of which typically you would think would outrage conservative white women, they looked over that because they said, look, this man is a white supremacist. And while the way he does that might be odious, he is going to create a world in which white men can prosper. And as women, they see their job in their families as making sure that they secure future power for the men in their lives. We understand that when we think about Black women, right? That Black women are like, you will not kill our sons, right? Stop locking up our sons and our husbands. We ride for Black men, and we've never thought as white women as people who ride for their men, but they absolutely do. And they absolutely voted in that way. So they put their racial interest first. And when that happens, then it's really hard to have solidarity under this category of womanhood, because we realize now that you're saying, I'm not going to be in solidarity with some woman across race and gender. I'm trying to make sure that when my son is grown, white privilege and all of the things that come with it will be available to him. And they understand, I don't even know if white women get this about themselves yet, that for them, a world in which white men grow up and they are not able to dominate as every other generation of white men has, they see that as a failure of them to make the world safe for their sons. And so what you have is a narrative that sounds the same, but with vastly different consequences depending on who you're talking to. So for Black women, they are like, please stop killing our sons. And for white women, they're like, please don't take away my son's ability to be a CEO, a president, to dominate everyone. And that is the place where our solidarities really shift, because we're fighting for very different kinds of possibilities for the children and the people in our lives. And note that at that point, womanhood hadn't even come into the picture yet. So there are some places where we could be in solidarity. We could be in solidarity around reproductive justice. We could be in solidarity around the pay gap. We could be in solidarity around the fact that even no matter your race, part of what Me Too taught us is that men in general are awful to women and commit acts of sexual violence against them, no matter who they are. But we can't even begin to talk to each other about that because we're all working so hard to secure our racial futures. And frankly, that makes me sad quite often.
Well, let's talk about the Me Too movement, because it seems to me that the resurgence of the women's movement is easily seen in the Me Too movement, right? You hear again, you have Black women and women of color's opinions as victims continue to be silenced. Was sort of, even though you have Tarana Burke, really was the person, she was a woman of color, a Black woman, who started that movement. Although the movement wasn't, she wasn't acknowledged as the founder of the movement for a very long time. And I think that the media, in many respects, prioritized white women's platforms and deemed the leading spokespeople to be white. And also in the 2017 Women's March, women of color challenged the organizers who failed to address perhaps their brand of feminism, intersectionality, which would include race and class privilege. So what do you think are the mistakes and lessons women are continuing to learn from the Me Too movement and the Women's March? And also, how do these recent national challenges affect the future expectations to work together to address racial equality? Because that really is I think, what is significant. Robin, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I hope any white woman listening who feels a little bit offended and feels like this is a rather discouraging way to think about it, prove us wrong, right? Show us different, please, right? I hope that gets your back up a little bit. I think it's clear the scales have fallen from our eyes. This whole post-racial narrative during the Obama years, this is over. I don't think anybody is confused that we are so not post-racial. In many ways, it looks like pre-civil rights. We've almost dismantled the Voting Rights Act. I think that white women, there's no way we have not gotten the message that we don't represent all women, that there's not some universal woman's experience. There's not some universal sisterhood. There could be an alignment, as Brittany says, and it would absolutely be in all of our best interests. We have to be able to recognize that and stop being manipulated by these kind of racial resentments and fears. You know, I'm thinking about, again, what Brittany had said about the interests of white mothers. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about schools and how effective and efficient schools are as mechanisms for sorting children into unequal places in life, which I think pretty much we all know, or we would not have the energy we have about what kind of schools our children go to. But why is it okay for somebody's child to have an inferior education as long as my child has the best education, right? We have to change the way we think about what it means to share and open up. It doesn't have to mean that you don't get this, but the very best, those kind of concepts, we have to challenge.
And I want to discuss when you said, white women hearing this have to feel offended, right? And I think that is certainly something that happens when we're having this discussion. It certainly happens when I have this discussion with my friends, people that I love. Privilege shaming issues, right? You call attention to the fact that white women may not be aware of their privilege. And when you do it, there is the risk that white women will feel attacked for this perceived non-inclusion, or even worse, that they are being called racist. And you deal a lot with that masterfully in your book, White Fragility. And you explain how white people do control all the instruments of power, and therefore only they can exercise racial privilege over other races. Can you really try to reconcile that for us?
Yeah, white women, we have such a potential way in to understand this. From a very early age, I knew the world was unfair for little girls because I swam against the current in terms of sexism and patriarchy. And I've spent my life thinking about it in detail. I was in my 30s before I ever considered that I benefited from and colluded in somebody else's oppression. So for me, that's the real learning edge. That it is so much more challenging to look at internalized superiority and a lot easier to look at, victimization, right? And so we have this way in, but we so often use it as a way out. Yes, I have resentments about patriarchy, but I cannot use them then to say, well, until I get mine, I'm not going to help you get yours. When there's a piece of racism I don't understand, I just change the roles in my mind, right? So a woman who feels privilege shamed, I haven't heard that term, but I get it. Or attack. Just imagine yourself trying to give a man feedback on sexism, trying to get him to see that the world was set up for him, and having him say, well, that just makes me feel shame. It's like, too bad, get over it. I don't have a lot of slack for white lamenting about this makes me feel guilty or shameful. Sometimes when I'm doing a workshop, I will ask white people to honestly assess what percentage of their day do they feel racial shame. And I have them do that because racial shame is going to come up almost every time. Somebody's going to bring up, this is making me feel shame. To be honest, most white people feel it 0 on a daily basis, 2-3%, just in that moment when somebody had the audacity to point out our privilege, and we can easily avoid it. So I would ask white people, and white women in particular, how is that functioning? And what would you want to say to a man who responded to you the way you're responding to women of color? And that usually will reveal it and hopefully motivate them to respond differently.
Now, Brittany, in your book, Eloquent Rage, a Black feminist discovers her superpower. I love the book. I just think it's fantastic. You talk about the fact that you have this deeply personal journey, right? And you say that you embrace Black feminism with a capital B and a capital F. But you also say that the only way forward is to acknowledge the past. And I think would you argue then, when Black people, in particular Black women, acknowledge a painful past, it does affect their ability to trust and work together with white women and white feminist agendas, because there is that difference in the agendas, which you both so eloquently pointed out.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, when I was listening to Robin, part of the reason I like Robin's work is because she's so forthright, and she has this concept where she says, like, white people got to build up racial stamina, right? Because everybody feels so attacked whenever you even begin to talk about race. They have this whole kind of visceral reaction. Well, here's the thing. I feel tired that I have to keep on talking to white women about the fact that they are racist and that they need to do better. And I think that there's this nice convergence between Robin's work and mine, where she says you have to build up racial stamina. And what I'm saying to Black women and women of color is you have the right to your rage over this past history and over this contemporary situation in which we find ourselves. The situation in which we're always having to explain, we're always having to go back to be extra vigilant to make sure that that we're excellent in every capacity, every respect. And then white women can do one offensive thing. You pointed out, they start to cry. You get framed as the aggressor, and you're the angry Black woman and you're unsafe and you get policed. And so no one cares about Black women and girls' tears at all. To me, that's exhausting and it's enraging. And so part of what I need white women to do is recognize that not only do you have this work of building your awareness, which we all need, but you also got to recognize that Black women might not be too nice to you as you're working to build it. Like, we are tired of this conversation because it wears on us, and we show the wear and tear in our own mental health and in our own physical health. And part of what's happening in the country at this moment is that we're at a breaking point, and Black folks are tired of being nice about trying to get white women to understand. And so you might actually encounter a little bit of rage, and you might be like, oh, where did that come from? Right? And it's like, because you've just been out here being a white girl for much longer than you've been aware of it. And so your awareness now gives me this, opening to finally talk to you. And so once you open it, like there might be a flood, girl, and you have to get ready for that and trust. But here's the thing I know about Black women. When we come to the table and hit you with the flood, we're trusting or hoping at least that you are now ready to be a grown up and have the conversation. Because the women who we don't trust, we don't say nothing to them about it. Because what is the point, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, how do you think Black women's anger can be this sort of powerful source in addressing racism and sexism? How does that work? If it's met, Robin, with the oh my goodness, now the white tears, especially if you're in a workspace, which has happened to me. If you are, trying to establish this allyship in a think tank, voting group, how does that work?
Well, we're not going to get there from the current paradigm that says only mean people who intend to cause harm across race ever could. And so there's just, the stamina is also rooted in some basic premises. And one of them is that it's about you, but it's not about you. So this is where you can draw from sexism again. I don't know about you, but I have rarely ever given a man feedback on sexism because I don't think I've ever had that go well. And so do I see it all the time? Yes. Do I think all men have it? Yes. Do I bother talking to them about it? No, because it often gets worse, not better. And that is exactly the dynamic that happens with white people. There's a question I often ask when I'm in front of a mixed group. I ask the people of color in the room, how often have you attempted to give a white person feedback on any of their unaware racist assumptions or behaviors, and had that go well for you? And the number one answer is never, never have I experienced it. And number two would be it rarely. And so if somebody is venting, they're giving you feedback with a lot of rage, you have to recognize that maybe they just had enough, or maybe you are safe enough for them to show that rage. Mm-hmm. And we have to build our ability to bear witness to it. What woman couldn't relate to a man who was open enough to receive feedback on sexism? And so she started going and she started building, and she started expressing a lot of anger. It would be about him, but not really about him. It's just like, oh my God, here's someone who I can say this to, and out it's going to come. So you just have to change how you understand these dynamics.
And in your book, you argued that by continuing to downplay and silence Black women and women of color's anger toward racism, you perpetuate white fragility. That's one of the tenets that I picked up. Can you, and you also discuss white women's tears as political. And I thought that, and Brittany's nodding her head, I thought that was fascinating. And maybe you both can speak to this. Can you explain why white tears can be viewed as a barrier to allyship? Because that's the ultimate goal here. I want us to get to a place where we can discuss how we can have effective partnership.
You want me to go first, Brittany?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. First of all, we've all been socialized to respond to white women's tears, to kind of respond to that delicate damsel in distress kind of thing. And so things happen in the room when white women cry. So let's back up and just a lot of us think that emotions are just these pure things that just come up. And so whatever emotions come up have to be attended to. But emotions are political in that the framework through which I'm perceiving is what is shaping the emotions I'm having. In other words, 20 years ago, if you said to me, Robin, you're being racist, I would have had a whole set of emotions because of what framework I interpreted that to mean through, right? Today, if you say it to me, I'm going to have a very different set of emotions. One of them will be curiosity, openness, empathy. I want to know, what am I doing? Because the framework that I hear that through is different. And that's a socio-political framework, right? So it drives the emotions, and then the emotions get externalized and they impact other people. And so they get externalized in behaviors that have an impact. So they're political in that way too. It's not an isolated internal thing that's happening. So when a white woman cries, generally the whole room rallies around her. She becomes the victim. People of color are now the aggressors. And there's another piece, which is we bring our histories into the room with us. And part of being white is to see yourself as outside of history. You know, you're just a unique, special individual. But no, we carry a history. And, you know, I'm going to invoke Emmett Till. It just takes one white woman in distress around interaction with a Black person for someone to literally get killed. Let's look at Amy Cooper.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know that we could have gotten a more classic visual representation of white fragility, white women's tears. Had it gone the way it usually went, Mr. Cooper may have been killed, which she knew. And actually expected that the institutions would be behind her tears. So I'll stop there because you see I have energy about it, but I think Brittany does too.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, and I was thinking about Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was a famous anti-lynching activist from the 19th and early 20th century who dared to suggest in 1892 that perhaps it wasn't the case that Black men were just going around raping white women, leading to all these lynchings, but that white women were actively engaged in these illicit liaisons with Black men, that they were consenting sexual partners to Black men. And white men showed out. They burned down a newspaper. They ran her out of the South because there is a whole political apparatus. White manhood and white womanhood are built on this idea of a dangerous Black man who wants to rape white women. It's why you see the president, he won't say the Black rapist because he knows that he can't say that. But this is why he talks about Mexicans coming to rape white women, because he knows that this narrative about an endangered, distressed white woman, you know, it gins up white male aggression. And here's the thing. And so, you know, we got to figure out how we challenge white men to think differently about that. But also white women know that they have been beneficiaries of that, of a world in which everybody rushes to protect them and to think about their feelings. Meanwhile, I would ask white women to consider, how many times have you seen a Black woman cry in front of you in a workplace? Like, really? We don't do it. We are socialized. Don't you do that shit? Don't you ever, like, you better, you know, if you got to go in there, you better suck it up. But don't you ever let anybody see you cry. Imagine that, right? That it's considered a public right of being in the world to be a white woman, that when you feel distress, you cry. And when you're a Black woman, you learn the exact opposite, and you learn it by the time you're a little girl. And I think about my girlhood and all of the moments when terrible things happened to me, and I took pride in the fact that no one ever saw me cry about them, right? That I was strong. I was that way by age 9. I talk about an eloquent rage. At age 9, my father was killed, and I go to school and I never cry a tear. I never miss a day of school. And I'm proud of this, because at 9, I have already learned that this is what it means to be a Black girl in the world, because that is who my mother had to be in the world as a Black woman trying to make it, right? And so there are long histories of this particular thing going on, and there's deep emotion and passion about it. And white women got to recognize this was the thing that was so shocking about Amy Cooper. Black women have been saying to each other for years, women of color, we say to each other, white women know they doing this. With Amy Cooper, we learned that she knew that white women know how to weaponize femininity, that it isn't just that the tears show up and that you guys can't control them, but that you are well aware. And let me also add, as we talk about Amy Cooper, see, earlier in this discussion, we framed this as a Trump white women voter problem, but Amy Cooper votes Democrat. There was a story about how she's a liberal voter. And so it's not just Trump women who use and weaponize white women's tears. And a lot of the women who are going to be appealed to by a publication like the 19th, you see yourselves as good white liberals. And that's the place where I want to talk to y'all, because I think you've got to figure out how you change these Trump women voters. But white liberal women, sometimes y'all are the worst enemies. Y'all are the ones who you are the ones who have proximity to Black women in these social progressive organizations. You run these nonprofits, and you work with Black women, and then Black women come to you and they talk to you about things, and you undermine them. You don't support them. You're not good allies, even in liberal spaces. And so this is not just a conservative problem. And sometimes when Black folks get together, we're like, liberal white people are the worst ones, because they don't think they're the problem, and they actually are.
Well, that is a perfect segue, because I actually went outside of my group and started asking people, what questions do you have about allyship? And one woman said, how can white women support Black women without laying an emotional burden on them, or making them feel guilty, or making them feel like the professor of Black everything? Which I thought was a fascinating question, right? How do they do that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, can I just add one piece to the tears, and then I'm going to answer that?
Yeah, because
that white women know not to cry in a male-dominated environment. There's no way I would cry in a male-dominated environment. There's no way I would let men see me cry, because I recognize the direction of power. And so I think it's worth noticing why so comfortable crying in the presence of Black people around feedback, when we know better than to do that in front of white men. My point is, we recognize what our position is in those two different dynamics, right? Okay. The very fact that the person asked the question, reveals that, I don't know, they kind of know the answer to the question. Don't do that. Don't go to Black people and make them the professor of everything. I mean, that's the tension to how do you listen? How do you take guidance without turning all the responsibility and offloading all the tensions and all the psychic and emotional and intellectual labor onto Black people? There are plenty of Black people who are happy to educate white people, and they write books, and they make movies, and they do seminars, and they get paid to do that. So you cannot look at a Black person as owing you automatically to give that to you, that is incredible expertise, and it has to be acknowledged. So outside of a trusting, close relationship, and even if you have a trusting, close relationship, you don't have to ask about racism. If you truly have Black people in your lives and you're just together, you'll see what you need to see. You'll hear what you need to hear without having to get schooled really directly. Those are my thoughts on that.
What do you think, Brittany? Because you said sometimes Black, and I've heard this also in my circles, you have Black women saying, my goodness, liberal white women are really the problem because they're in these spaces and they don't even realize they're the problem.
Yeah.
How do we become the solution?
Yeah, look, I think that part of the challenge is that once you do want to solve it, you want you think it's a science. And so I think Robin is great in terms of thinking about, her work helps us to think about what are the nuts and bolts that you need to learn. But the other part of this is there's an art to this, right? And it happens in the place where you build relationships. So the real thing white folks have to do, you have to get up close and personal and build some relationships with people of color. And here's the thing that is hard. That is really slow work. People don't let you in easily. And so it is the quality and capacity of how you keep on showing up that every time we talk to you about it, you don't get defensive, that when you are told something that you're quick to correct, that you get the mea culpa, but that you don't also dwell there and just keep on bringing it up, right? You just hear it. You're like, cool, I got it. I'm gonna fix that. I'm sorry. But, we don't have to do a bunch of emotional labor. That is a way that Black folks and brown folks learn that we can trust you. And so I would just invite white folks to think about this as a journey. This is not a simple equation. You learn the solution, you solve it, one and done. This is about us learning how to actually be in community with each other. And, I tell people it's like learning a new language, right? And it's sometimes like learning it through one of those immersion programs where you just get dropped off in a foreign country. You have to figure out what people are talking about. Eventually you do, but initially it's very disorienting and you doubt your own capacity to get it. But when you stick with it, you find that, oh goodness, I understood that. I got that. And then you become fluent as you commit to the work. And so that's what, so once liberal white women realize, for instance, that, I might be part of the problem too. I might be making things uncomfortable with all of my assumptions, and you invite the feedback, then you're now in the process. And as long as you don't rush it and you don't think you're going to be there in 6 months or a year, or after you follow a 12-step program or what have you, then you'll be just fine.
Now, what about finding common areas of common agenda areas? I think both of you mentioned perhaps reproductive rights, perhaps equal pay. That's something that I think all women, at least the equal pay part, can agree upon, because I was getting a lot of these questions about how can white women navigate genuine allyship versus performative behavior. And I'm sure both of you have heard it before. I actually had not. I wasn't sure what the distinction was. I'd like both of you to explain that, what that means exactly.
Let me say this. Performative behavior is when you do stuff for cookies, right? So out front, you're super progressive. We have versions of this, right, where people appear one way to the public, and then everybody who knows them whispers in private about how they're really not actually great. They're terrible to women in the back channels, or you have raggedy relationships, but you're out front yelling about women's empowerment, and you might even be leading a women's empowerment organization, but then the culture is toxic. It's competitive. You don't support women. You don't listen to them. That's performance, right? It is for what you look like in front of other people. Whereas real, genuine allyship requires that you're risking something. So I tell people all the time, I don't need you. If we're in a meeting and I'm being berated or some racist stuff is happening, you see it, and then I'm always going to be in the meeting like, you're not going to do that. So I will stand up and say something. If you let me hang out there on that limb by myself, and then after the meeting, you come to me and you whisper, I really like what you said. Like, that was so helpful. You were so great. I agree with you. Your whispered allyship, how does that help me now? Like, I've risked everything, and now you want to whisper, because here's the thing. Because you want me to give you cookies and absolution after the fact. You want me to think you're a good person who understands my position, but in the moment when it counted, you didn't risk anything. That is performative allyship. You want to be on my side, but you don't want to be on my side publicly. And who needs that?
Mm-hmm. Robin?
Yeah, I'm thinking about the part of the question about common cause. I think we can never forget that the causes we have in common are also shaped by race. So when we talk about reproductive rights, we can't talk about it as if we have a shared experience. We also have to always be grappling with, and how does race shape the issues There's a concept of targeted universalism. If we centered Black women's issues, we would address also white women's issues, because we have overlap, and then there's this whole other layer that Black women are dealing with. If we focus there, in addressing those, we will also be addressing white women's issues. That's one thought I have. Another is that I believe that her name is Pat Parker. She's a Black woman that I quote in the book, and she just has, this is what she says, which I think is a great guide. First of all, forget that I'm Black. All right. And I think what she's saying is stop reducing me to that. Stop having everything be about that. Stop having me always have to speak to that. And second of all, don't you ever forget that I'm Black. Which means I have a different experience than you, different needs and interests, etc. And that is the tension, I believe, that white women have to hold when we're looking at common cause.
Yeah. So, our panel goal was to talk about effective allyship amid a racial reckoning that has led to a lot of moments of critical self-examination. I think we are in that moment. People are critically self-examining their thoughts, their actions, their place. How do we work together right now to demand equity and equality? Because I do believe that this is a movement, not a moment. This is a turning point, right, in America's racial history. Do you agree that it's a turning point first? And how do we proceed together? That's a tough one, but how do you think is the best way forward?
Well, Sunny, this week is the week that we mark Black Women's Equal Pay Day.
Yes.
How far into the year Black women have to work to make the money that white men made last year. And I don't think we've even made it to Latino women's Equal Pay Day yet.
No.
So that's just one issue area that we can begin to think about. We need to be thinking about pay equity. So when we think about what does it mean to be in this historical turning point, and I do think, given the way that young people risk their lives in the middle of a pandemic to come out into the streets and to declare that Black Lives Matter, we've never seen anything like that in any moment in American history at that level. I think that we have to now use that momentum to actually work at the level of policy. And so we've got to look at those demands. And so we've got to think about pay equity. We are in the middle of a housing crisis. Eviction, to the extent that incarceration deeply affects Black men and then also women of color, the eviction crisis, the housing crisis affects Black women because we own the majority of Black homes, and we typically are the center of Black families. And so when our people are being kicked out, it doesn't just upend like our wealth, it also upends schooling, it upends safety, so many things. So there are real issue areas for us to get behind. And as Robin said, this is an old school Black feminist talking point. When we get free, everybody gets free. Because if you should secure reproductive rights for Black women, then you secure them for every woman, but you secure them in the broadest possible terms. When we build a world where undocumented folks can move around unharassed and able to go about their business, then we create a world that's equitable for all women, even women who are documented, right? So we've got to think in terms of how we support the most marginalized women, recognizing that that is not about costing women with more privilege and power something, although it could in the long run. It's about creating a space that's more equitable for everybody. So I say let's get behind the issues that Black women have been bringing to the table and advancing. And in that way, that is the thing that then changes our quality of life. And here's the final result of that. When you start when it's not so hard for us, when we're not having to struggle every single day to make it, then we have the space to actually think about the quality of our relationships with each other, right? Building policy equity also creates capacity for some of the emotional work that we have to do around democracy and allyship with each other.
Robin?
Beautifully said. I'm not sure I have anything to add to it. What I would say to white women is assume it's you. Assume it's you that sends Brittany home exhausted every single day, and then get to work trying to figure out how it's you. And also assume it's you that will make that difference and figure out what is the role that you can play. I personally highly recommend Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy Workbook. I love it because it keeps you on an ongoing path or journey. We're never going to be finished, but if we don't, you asked if this was a turning point, it is a potential turning point. But already we see the forces of resistance coming back really strong and really hard. So we can never be complacent. We can never think that we've arrived. Every time we've ever thought that, look where we are.
Do you think, in response to Brittany's point, that if Black women's issues are first, you create a space that is equitable for everyone? Are white women in a place where they can do that?
It's a tall order from the current paradigm, but even the very fact we're having this conversation, the very fact that the term systemic or structural racism is in the mainstream, I mean, these are things that haven't been here before, right? We have the tools, if you will. And so if we could understand that centering Black women, it actually, and using our platform and our positions to do that, to contribute to that as white women, is actually in all of our interests. Well, we could have a powerful movement in every axes of life, in every form of oppression. You divide people who actually have common interest. So we have to stop letting ourselves be manipulated by anti-Blackness.
And so perhaps that is the answer. Mm-hmm. If white women use their privilege to center Black women's agenda, then you create a space that is equitable for everyone. Mm-hmm. And you fight the patriarchy.
There you go. That's
and
it.
I think with that, we're out of time. So thank you. I've learned so much, and I hope everyone else that is watching did as well.
Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Sonny.
Thank you.
Why is ambition respected in men and criticized in women? Well, when asked to draw a leader, the vast majority of people, both men and women, draw a man. When we imagine positions of power, we erase women from the picture. It's time to challenge cultural stereotypes and outmoded mindsets. The world is a better place when we support one another's ambitions, whatever they may be. Our ambition is to challenge double standards to help achieve women's equality. What's yours? Embrace ambition.
This has been an incredible week of programming where the 19th and our journalists have gotten the chance to go deep on the politics and policy of this moment with some of the nation's foremost leaders. Now, to close out the week, we're going to flip the script a little with a conversation on the vision behind the 19th and its mission to give all women the news and information they need to be equal participants in our democracy. And we're going to do that with a conversation moderated by Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, and my 19th co-founder, Emily Ramshaw.
Well, I am so excited to be here with you today, Emily. Obviously, what you have created with the 19th is something so special and so important. And when as we had our conversation just a couple weeks ago, I thought, how can I best support this initiative and this incredible media platform? And as much as you have these great conversations throughout the week, obviously in the interviews that you've done, as opposed to doing that, I thought, how better to serve this and to have a conversation asking you how this came to be and really the impact and goals that you have for the 19th, which I am blown away by. But just wanted to take the time to be able to have that conversation with you.
Wonderful. Well, obviously, this is an enormous honor for us to get to be part of this conversation. I would be lying if I said this wasn't a completely surreal, amazing experience for us to get to have. And we are just really, really appreciative that these are issues that you deeply care about, and thrilled to get to be in this conversation with you. So I am an open book. I'm not used to being the one in the hot seat, but go for it.
Based on what we have a shared interest in, and of course, just the goals of the 19th, but also just our commonality as women, right? What we go through as women who are balancing work, raising children, all of those things, I think for me made it really compelling to just have this conversation on a really human level, as well as one on the professional level. So we can just jump right in if that works for you.
I'm ready.
How did this come to be? Where did the idea come from? How long did it take it to come to fruition? And was this timing planned for you? Obviously not having any sense of COVID-19 or Black Lives Matter and all of this being where we sit right now, but knowing that this ramp up to the celebrating the 19th Amendment, was this all part of your plan?
You know, it honestly wasn't. This all began for me 4 years ago. Hillary Clinton was running for president. I had a brand new newborn baby girl. I was on maternity leave, and in between sort of the dark moments of postpartum depression and changing diapers and being covered in spit up, I was listening to these conversations on, 24-hour cable news around women and electability, women and likability. And it might have been the hormones talking in that moment, but I just felt enormous rage that these were still conversations that we were having in 2016. And I thought in that moment, what we really need is a new national newsroom by and for women that throws sort of those questions of electability and likability out the window, and that really covers women deeply with empathy and with respect. And then I went back to, raising a newborn. Honestly, it just sort of fluttered right out of my brain. And then almost 4 years later, we were looking at a campaign cycle with more women than we've ever seen before on the 2020 campaign trail. All of these same questions were getting asked over and over again, and it just felt like a moment. I could see the light. I had a toddler instead of an infant. I thought, this is a moment, and if I don't take this moment, what a missed opportunity. So that was about a year ago. Here we are. We have just launched the 19th, the country's first nonprofit, nonpartisan newsroom at the intersection of gender, politics, and policy. And yes, as you mentioned, the world has changed in an enormous way in the last 6 months alone. And I'm happy to get into some of that conversation. But what a moment to be starting this work. We are over the moon that it's just begun.
Well, I mean, it's really incredible if you think about the timing, and I'm sure in some ways, I would imagine you may have taken a moment and said, should we shift this date? Should we launch at a different time? Especially having so many women who work for your organization, which in and of itself, I think is very important and powerful right now, but also comes with its own challenges with what moms are juggling at the moment with homeschooling their kids, with, obviously working from home. And I'm curious how that's affected the staffing that you have with the 19th, and if that's something that you've all rallied around in sort of the sisterhood to support each other through, which is what I imagine the case is, but also what sort of nuances come up in that you may have not anticipated, obviously not knowing what this landscape would be like right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, we did take a break, as you mentioned. In the month of February, my husband was diagnosed with COVID. I was like underwater trying to fundraise for this venture with a 4-year-old daughter at home, who I was literally stiff arming to keep out of my fundraising calls, while my husband was basically groaning in the background. I mean, it was like just this surreal experience. And my colleagues and I, we stopped and we thought, maybe we can't do this in this moment. Our fundraising took an enormous hit. The corporate revenue market really sort of dried up. We thought, my God, all of this work, we're going to have to hire all of these people virtually if we're able to do it at all. Should we just pause? Should we just wait a year to ride this out? But then the realities were the stories were so important. Women were being disproportionately affected by this pandemic in basically every arena except for mortality rates, whether it was, the job losses in this economic recession, whether it was the frontline healthcare workers being, infected with COVID, the childcare burden, obviously, that we've talked about a lot. We really realized in this moment, our calling was more important than it had ever been. And so it was an enormous risk. It's still an enormous risk, candidly, but we felt like we had to jump in, with 2 feet. Now, having a team that is, first of all, our team is not all women. We're 91% women. Lots of folks with small children, with elderly parents, navigating that sandwich generation. We never imagined all of these really generous leave policies that we had put into place, all of these flexible remote work conditions, that we would need to take advantage of them all at once, which is what happens when a global pandemic hits. But it has been extraordinarily beautiful and moving to have this team of people who treat each other and the women they cover with empathy. Almost every Zoom call we're on, there's somebody feeding a baby a bottle or trying to, get their kid to play on the iPad without disrupting the entire call. It's just, this is a moment. And it's so special to be doing this in an environment with this many extraordinary women and journalists.
Well, and also that in many ways you're capturing this moment in such an extraordinary way, because it's almost like it all came to a head at the same time for you. Obviously, in this launch, and I can't wait to see so many of these interviews that people have been able to watch over the last week. But I think what's so compelling is that even looking at all the risk there, you did it. you just took that jump and you took that leap of faith. And I think there's so much that we can all learn from that, that in those moments where it might feel scary, you just seem to trust your gut and go, this is the right time to do this. And so I think there's a lot to celebrate for you doing that. You know, I am also really aware that obviously in the media landscape at the moment, having women's voices be able to be part of that storytelling is so key. I think as we're looking at, as you say, speaking to compassion and empathy and all of those as an undercurrent of how this reporting is happening, how do you think the reporting from the journalists you have is going to be shaped just by virtue of being women, being mothers, you know, and that role, and how it'll be covered, how things like COVID, for example, will be covered differently from the 19th than it would be on some other platform?
Right. Those are great questions. I mean, I think, you know, starting with the sort of pandemic within a pandemic of racial injustice in this country, one of the first big stories we broke, we were the first national outlet really to elevate the Breonna Taylor case. And that was because Breonna Taylor's family came to one of our extraordinary reporters, our editor-at-large, Aaron Haynes, and said, you know, we feel like Black men who are being killed by police are having their stories elevated in a way that Black women who are killed by police are not. And for us, that was an extraordinary gender lens on a story that really propelled the nation into conversations around Say Her Name. You know, when you think about COVID and this moment and this pandemic, you know, childcare is so front and center to getting this economy back on track, to ensuring that women, this isn't a lost generation of women in the workforce. And so many of our stories are framed through that lens. You know, the reality is, in this industry, the overwhelming majority of politics and policy reporters and editors are men, and almost all of them are white men. And what that means is that those are the people deciding what's news and what isn't, whose voices are elevated, which experts are quoted, whether those stories play on the front page or the homepage. So it feels for us critical in this moment more than ever. You know, I mean, I'd love to ask you, obviously, you are someone who has been deeply covered by the media in so many ways, many of them.
Hold on a second, I thought, here we go. I'm going to stop you at a certain point because I get to wear the journalist hat today. But yes, please, of course. No, go for it.
All right. I mean, what I want to ask you is, why do you think that we need a woman-focused news organization? How do you think coverage is different, will be different with women and people of color at the helm?
Well, do you know what's so interesting is, and I was actually reading just a couple weeks ago, this fascinating article about the suffrage movement. And what resonated with me about it is specifically the term suffragette. And you'll follow my train of thinking in a moment, because the impetus for the word suffragette started in a UK newspaper in 1906. And it was meant to belittle the women who were part of the suffrage movement. It's like, oh, we'll just add a little et to the end here.
Amazing, yes.
And what I find so fascinating is that was then, before digital media, before the online space, before things could travel around the world with rapid fire. And the American women, as part of the suffrage movement, didn't want to be called suffragettes. And yet this term, coined by one man in 1906, has stuck as part of a movement. And I think when you look at that and you look at it through that lens of the power of one person's influence in the media to be able to shape an entire movement or way of thinking or even an ideology or an identification, if women have their voice heard as equally, how different that would have been, right? And so even though in that article, the point was not about the term suffragette, what stuck with me is the ability of influence. And if it's only coming from a patriarchal lens, how that's shaping everything that we see. And whether you actually read the article or not, this one or any other one, I think what's so fascinating, at least from my standpoint and my personal experience the past couple of years, is the headline alone, the clickbait alone makes an imprint. That is part of how we start to view the world, how we interact with other people. And I think there's so much toxicity out there in what is being referred to, my husband and I talk about it often, this economy for attention. Right? That is what is monetizable right now when you're looking at the digital space and media. And so if you're just trying to grab someone's attention and keep it, you're going for something salacious versus something truthful. And I think that once we can get back to the place, which is what you're creating here, which is why I think it's so important, where people are just telling the truth in their reporting and telling it through a compassionate or empathetic lens, it's going to help bind people as community in a way that I think the moment we're feeling much more of a disconnect in a space where we could be feeling more of a connection.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think the business model plays into this, honestly. I mean, part of the reason, honestly, the majority of the reason we launched the 19th as a nonprofit newsroom, as a member-supported newsroom, is so that we have that flexibility, so that we aren't, chasing advertiser-based clicks, so that we aren't, chasing the most salacious headline. We have the time and the space to tell stories the way that they ought to be told, to tell them with empathy, that, in ways that honor women's lives and experiences, that give them depth. Our reporters are based all over the country. They're not all in DC and New York and LA. They are in Des Moines, Iowa. They're in Orlando, Florida. They're in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They're telling real women's stories, telling those stories where they are. There's no such thing for us as sort of flyover country, right? I mean, this country is filled with women who are not monolithic. This is a nuanced voting bloc, and we ought to treat them like that.
Well, and I think what's so fascinating too, to that point, obviously with, this year's election and the voting is so incredibly important and something I'm very passionate about. I was talking yesterday with Gloria Steinem, who I've connected with recently, and legend, right? So you just go, how fantastic to be able to have that time. But talking about the importance of the vote, and even right now, the census isn't going to be able to be completed this year because of COVID. And you think about women who are in marginalized communities or areas where they aren't going to be able to be accounted for, how special, as you say, that with the 19th, you don't simply have reporters in these large cities, but you have a representation all throughout the country and in pockets where you might not normally hear those voices, but they are so valuable to be heard because it helps us understand what each of us are going through as opposed to this broad stroke. I think it's key. I think, that alone is really going to shape the kind of storytelling that you're going to be able to do there. So how do you think the 19th's work will change how people consume news? I think right now, as we sort of touched on, so many people are just getting these pop-ups and alerts, but do you think people are going to go looking for this type of news because it will nourish them in a different way potentially, or it'll inspire them in a different way?
I mean, I hope so. What you are seeing in, honestly, the last few days since we launched is an enormous outpouring of support. Thousands and thousands of people becoming members, supporting us with their hard-earned dollars. Thousands of additional people subscribing for our newsletters every given day. I mean, I think there really is a hunger for this kind of coverage. But for us, it isn't enough to draw readers into our fold on our platforms. Honestly, we have a moral obligation to meet women where they already are. And for me, that means making our journalism entirely free to republish by every other news organization in America. So we have launched with a terrific partnership with Univision. Univision is translating our work into Spanish and distributing it. The USA Today network is distributing our work to more than 260 regional newspaper markets, which is just unbelievable for us to be able to reach that kind of audience from day one. And, then across social media, yes, there's a lot of toxicity there. If you can find your way to the right platforms like ours, our obligation really is to find women on the platforms they're already using, they're already consuming, and make sure we're getting those really critical headlines in front of them.
I mean, I think what's going to be really interesting to see now, having this kind of media platform for not just women who are our peers, for example, but for young women who are, I'm always so inspired by these women who are in high school, for example, who are just mobilizing to this next chapter of their life, and they're so engaged and so ready to be the leaders of the next generation. And this kind of content, their ability to be able to not have to seek it out or find it, and it will probably really shape so much in how people are able to mobilize, just having those assets at the tip of their fingers.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're hoping, honestly, across the generational spectrum. I mean, I think in many ways, it's just as important for us to be telling stories of older women who are, in many ways feeling like they're left out of a national dialogue on these issues. It's been fascinating to have a staff that really sort of crosses both the generational and the, socioeconomic, racial divide. It's been really extraordinary to build a truly empathetic and representative team, which is something you don't have the luxury of getting to do if you're sort of trying to turn the Titanic of a major legacy news organization. The freedom and flexibility we've had to say, we're going to build the most representative newsroom in America. We're going to do it from day one. We're going to hire these extraordinary people from all walks of life, from all backgrounds, and give them the opportunity to elevate their voices and advance them in leadership in this organization. We hope we're setting the gold standard for the rest of the industry.
I mean, I can't imagine that you wouldn't be, right? And people are craving a change. I think in the place that we're all in right now, there's such a a moment where people are starting to question the systems that we've always believed in, where we're getting our information from as well. And I think, you know, you want to have trust in journalism, and you want to have trust in what you're reading and hope that it's fact. I mean, I think we've become so sadly comfortable with the idea that we are just getting all this stuff and it becomes noise as opposed to truth and accurate journalism. So I think, you know, if this can be the catalyst for reset for other news organizations, my goodness, it's going to change the game so much, and specifically that it's bipartisan. You know, I think when I have these conversations about encouraging people to go out and vote, I think it's often challenging for men and women alike, but certainly for people to remember just how hard it was to get the right to vote, and to be really aware of not taking that for granted. I mean, I look at that with my husband, for example. He's never been able to vote. And I think it's such an interesting thing to say the right to vote is not a privilege, it is a right in and of itself. But I really do hope that what you're able to encourage and what we're able to see happen through the 19th over the course of the next few months is that women understand that their voices are needed now more than ever, and the best way to exercise that is through voting.
Absolutely. I mean, we are in a pivotal moment in history. You know, the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which is upon us, extended the right to vote to white women. The asterisk in our logo is a signal of how far we have left to go. It took another 4 decades for women of color to be extended the same rights. In many states in this country, honestly, voter suppression is still a thing, and women are struggling yet to have their voices heard. So I think this moment, this anniversary is so critical. We hope to be one piece of the pie of giving women the representation and the elevation of voice that they deserve.
And I didn't realize that that's why you have the asterisk. That makes complete sense. I love that, because it's that just sort of addendum to what we're celebrating, but with the same awareness that it's not fully a celebration. There is still so much work to do. And you think about the Voting Rights Act and how even at this point, I was having this conversation just yesterday, it feels like we make so many strides forward, and yet there's still so much more to do. And so I think what will be fascinating is to watch now with this sort of ability for people to consume news in a very real way, that maybe we'll be able to accelerate that pace at which we get the change that we all deserve.
Well, I think we're also in a moment of racial reckoning in this country, and it's been really, honestly, stunning to watch all of this evolve as we were getting the 19th off the ground. Look, I am a white woman of privilege. I am the child of 2 journalists. I have had every opportunity. You know, the fact that I'm able to get this venture off the ground in this moment is almost predictable. What feels most empowering about this moment is that I have the opportunity to elevate the voices of women and other underserved people who have been underrepresented for so long. And I feel this obligation to make the business model work, to make the fundraising work, to build this platform so that women can have their voices heard. I mean, I'm curious what it has been like for you coming back to the United States, you know, in this moment, as a biracial woman in this moment of all these conversations around race and justice. What has that felt like for you, if I can turn the tables for a minute?
Of course. You know, I touched on this a couple months ago, actually, right when I had come back, and I said a few words for my high school alma mater for their graduating class, because I had come back after being away for so long, and because really I haven't lived in the States for almost 10 years. I lived in Canada for 7 years for work, so it's a really long lapse in time from being here. And to come back and to just see the state of affairs, I think at the onset, if I'm being honest, it was just devastating. It was so sad to see where our country was in that moment. And if there's any silver lining in that, I would say that in the weeks that were happening after the murder of George Floyd, in the peaceful protests you were seeing, in the voices that were coming out, in the way that people were actually owning their role and acknowledging their role that they played, either actively or passively, in the discrimination of other people, specifically of the Black community, it shifted from sadness to a feeling of absolute inspiration, because I can see that the tide is turning. And I think for so many of us, it's very easy to focus on the negativity. It's very easy to focus on that because it's what you hear out there, right? As I think I said to the high school girls when I was speaking to them, the loudest voices are often the negative ones, sadly. So I think, from my standpoint, it's not new to see this undercurrent of racism and certainly unconscious bias. But I think to see the changes that are being made right now is really, it's something that I look forward to being a part of, and being a part of using my voice in a way that I haven't been able to of late. So yeah, it's good to be home.
We're all ready for it too.
It's good to be home. I think, look, as we're sort of wrapping things up, and I know there's so much that you're going to continue to do with this platform, what is the role that we as supporters can play in this to keep the 19th true to its mission, to be able to play our part in this storytelling, for all of the people who are watching this going, I want to be engaged in some way. How do we best support you?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that terrific question. So the best way to support us, honestly, is to read. It's to consume everything that we're producing. It's to subscribe for our newsletters, which are all free. It's to attend our live events like this one, which are all free. And probably most important is, if you love what you're reading and you believe in our mission, to support us with your hard-earned dollars if you can. You can do that at 19thnews.org. We would love to have you in our founding circle as low as $19 a month. So, but honestly, the most important piece for us is your engagement. Tell us your stories, share your stories with us, be part of our community. We are so excited to have this opportunity, and we can't wait to, beautifully reflect the women and other underserved people in this country.
It's amazing. I mean, and if I wasn't already just so excited about everything that you're doing, I would be sad to not mention that we both also went to Northwestern. So I feel especially proud, again, supporting an alma mater, but just to see how you've been able to bring this to life. And especially, I think as a woman, also as a mother of a young child, just that you're able to balance it all and to use the sliver of extra time that you have, because I know what it's like with a toddler. There's not a lot of time, but to use that for the good of others, to use that in this creation of something that's going to benefit so many people. And, I think your acknowledgement of where you come from and what your upbringing was like didn't have to tee you up for this, right? And so whether that's a testament to your parents or how you were raised, or certainly to you, I just think it really needs to be applauded that you have made this active choice to serve women in underserved communities and to allow all of our voices to be heard. I think it's just excellent, and I can't wait to see everything that you guys accomplish.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't call out the extraordinary people on our team, the journalists and others who are making all of this possible, because they are phenomenal human beings beyond being phenomenal journalists. We are so thrilled that you chose to take part in the 19th Represents. This was just really game-changing for us and an extraordinary experience for me. And my daughter will be over the moon to be watching these videos from here till kingdom come. So.
Oh my gosh, how sweet. What's her name?
Her name is Sophie.
Hi, Sophie.
Wow, that was just extraordinary. Thank you, Duchess, for joining us and shining the light on the 19th News. And thank you to everyone who has made this week so special. We're so grateful for the opportunity to share these conversations and these voices with all of you. This week also wouldn't have been possible without the support of our 19th members. We are so hopeful you'll join them in supporting the 19th's mission to elevate women's voices. You can do that at 19thnews.org. If you missed any of this week's programming or just want to watch again, visit 19thnews.org/events. This week would not have been possible without our generous sponsors and philanthropic partners. That's Goldman Sachs, Intuit, the Impact Seat, the Lenfest Institute, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Wyncote Foundation, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, the Barbara Lee Family Foundation, the Stardust Fund, PEN America, the Heinz Endowments, CVS Health, the Panacea Collective, Aero PR, and Lingua Franca. Now that you know the 19th, we hope that you'll stick with us. You can read our daily journalism, sign up for our newsletter, attend future virtual events just like this one, and follow us on social media at 19th News. We cannot wait to see you back here the next time, and welcome to the 19th family.